Welcome, dear listeners, to Whispers in the Dark, where shadows tell stories and the night breathes secrets. I'm your guide through the unknown, your storyteller in the silence, weaving tales that will haunt your thoughts long after the last word fades. Here, we embrace the eerie, the unsettling, the stories that lurk just beyond the edge of the firelight. So settle in, dim the lights, and listen closely. The darkness has something to say. The final and 10th sinister haunting tale from Whispers in the Dark podcast is now here, and it's one that will haunt you long after the final whisper fades. So let's begin this horrifying tale, The Hollow Howl. Maggie Ellis had always found comfort in old things, the weight of time in stone, the quiet persistence of moss overtaking mortar, the forgotten corners of libraries that smelled of dust and leather. When the solicitor handed her the keys to Bryn Derw cottage, a moss-covered, slate-roofed dwelling crouching at the edge of a forest in North Wales, it felt as though she was being handed the past itself. A quiet, brooding kind of past, one that watched from the shadows. At 38, Maggie was newly divorced, disillusioned, and desperate for solitude. The years in London had drained her. The noise, the constant press of bodies, the sterile hush of lecture halls where she once spoke about pre-Christian folklore and myth, as though it were an academic curiosity rather than a living memory. When her marriage ended in a slow collapse of silence, she'd packed her books, sold their flat, and decided to finish the book she'd been too afraid to write. It was to be called Shadowed Land, the Forgotten Folklore of the Celtic Dead. And where better to write it than here, in the mountains of Gwynedd, where myth still hung heavy in the soil like ancient blood. The drive was long and winding, like a descent into something older. Past towns with names that curled on the tongue like spells, through moors mottled with gorse and heather, until finally her car crawled along a lane so narrow the brambles scraped the paint like claws. As she passed a toppled milestone, half buried in moss and carved with runes long eroded, she felt the air shift, thicker, still. The world beyond the windows slowed, and then stopped. Bryn Derw stood in a clearing at the edge of an ancient forest, its slanted roof dark with damp, its walls swallowed by ivy. 2 windows glared from the front like tired, half-lidded eyes. A small dry stone wall circled the garden, where bracken and nettle had reclaimed every inch of soil. She stepped out of the car and was hit by the silence. No birdsong, no breeze, just the soft hiss of fog rising from the earth in slow spirals. The cottage was smaller than she'd expected, more stooped, as though bearing a great weight. Inside was cold. The stone-flagged floor echoed beneath her boots. Dust coated the surfaces like ash. Cobwebs wavered in the corners. Yet it wasn't unpleasant, merely forgotten. The kind of place time had passed by rather than destroyed. The hearth was large and black with old soot, a relic from a time when fires were the only warmth. She ran her fingers along the mantel, finding a deep scratch in the wood. A single word carved in shaky, childlike letters. Gwylio. She didn't recognize the word. Welsh, probably. She made a mental note to look it up. Upstairs were 2 rooms, one a cramped bedroom with a warped window overlooking the woods, the other a storage room lined with shelves that had bowed under the weight of damp over the years. She set up her bed, unpacked her clothes, and turned on the electric heater that rattled to life with a reluctant hum. Night fell quickly in the valley. The sun sank behind the hills like a stone, leaving the sky bloodless. Mist rolled in through the trees, crawling across the grass like smoke. The silence became denser, the dark absolute. She lit a fire in the hearth, using kindling left in a rusted basket. The flames flared orange and spat shadows across the stone walls. She sat at the small oak table near the window, opened her notebook, and began to write. Her pen moved almost automatically. Fragments of lore, scraps of memory from her studies. She wrote of Ancaw, the Welsh personification of death, and why Ladi Wen, the white lady said to guard buried treasure. But her thoughts kept returning to something else, something older, mentioned only in footnotes. Chi Unwin, the spectral hounds of the other world. She paused, frowning. She could almost hear something under the wind, a sound so faint it may have been imagined. Crack. Her hand stilled. The fire popped, sending sparks into the air. Then again, crack. A sharp sound, like a twig breaking. She turned toward the window, her pulse quickening. Outside, the fog had thickened into a silver curtain, erasing the world beyond the stone wall. Trees loomed as vague shapes, their branches like fingers clawing skyward. And then, a howl. Long, low, and full of mourning. It did not rise, like a dog's call, but stayed flat, deep and cold, as though it emerged from beneath the ground. She stood slowly, moving to the window. Peering through the distorted glass, she saw nothing but fog. Yet she felt it, the sound vibrating in her chest, in the stone beneath her feet. Not a fox, not any animal she could name. The howl rose again, and this time it was closer. Maggie stepped back from the window, her breath caught in her throat. The sound was not natural. There was something else in it, a weight, a sadness, a warning. She tried to reason with herself. Maybe it was a fox, or a dog from a neighbouring farm. Animals sounded strange in the open wilds, especially at night. The fog distorted everything. Still, she shut the curtain tightly and shoved a chair under the doorknob for no reason she could explain. She did not sleep easily. She dreamed of footsteps crunching on leaves, of eyes in the dark, of something breathing just beyond sight. She woke near dawn, the fire cold. Her breath hung in the air. The mist outside had not lifted. If anything, it had thickened into something with shape and intent. She dressed quickly and walked the perimeter of the garden. Her boots left tracks in the wet grass. Near the back wall, she paused. The brambles had been disturbed, bent, crushed. Something had passed through. She crouched, heart hammering, and saw a mark in the earth. Not a paw. A print, yes, but not from any normal animal. It was too large, too heavy. The soil had sunk deep, as if pressed by something with weight far beyond flesh. She took a photo. Not that anyone would believe her. Later, she visited the village 3 miles away. A single row of stone buildings, a post office, and a pub called the Bleeding Stag. Inside, it smelled of old ale and smoke. The locals stared as she entered, the air shifting slightly with their silence. She ordered tea and asked casually if there were many wild dogs in the area. The bartender, a man in his 60s with a red face and clouded eyes, paused mid-pour. Dogs? Not many? Not wild ones? I heard something last night, howling. A woman at the bar crossed herself. The bartender set her mug down slowly. You're in the Derw cottage, aren't you? Maggie nodded. He said nothing for a moment, then, might be just foxes? Sound carries funny in the glen, but he didn't believe it. She could see it in the way his hand trembled as he picked up the cloth to dry a glass that didn't need drying. The woman beside him muttered, Chianos. Maggie turned. What? She looked up. Dog of the night. You'd best leave a light in every window. That's what they used to say. Why? But the woman only shook her head. Back at the cottage, night fell again. Maggie sat by the fire, her notebook open but untouched. Her eyes kept darting to the window. When the howl came again, low, hollow, impossibly close, she did not move, could not move. Something out there was watching, and it would not leave. The next morning brought no relief. The fog had not lifted. Instead, it had thickened like congealed breath over the valley. The world outside was colourless, drained of contrast. There, in the candlelight, a shape loomed just outside the glass. Not a face, not human, a snout, broad, wet with fog, fur matted and blacker than the night. And above it, 2 red eyes, burning, watching. Maggie could not scream, her throat closed, her muscles locked. The wolf stood at the window, impossibly tall. Its eyes met hers through the pane, and in that moment, she felt a coldness like death sweep through her. A voice, not spoken but felt, rumbled in the back of her mind.
You see me now.
And then it was gone. She did not sleep. At dawn, she dared to open the window. The outer sill was wet with frost, and in the thin layer of ice, she saw a single perfect print, paw-shaped, but too wide, too heavy. She traced it with a finger and found the imprint still cold. She drove into town again, unable to stay alone another night. At the Bleeding Stag, the locals avoided her eyes. One man made the sign of the cross as she entered. She approached the woman from the day before, who now sat nursing a tea in the far corner. "Please," Maggie said, voice tight. "What is it? What is Cyrnose?" The woman stared at her for a long moment. Her eyes were rheumy, pale as milk. "It's not a myth," she said. "It comes for those who dig too deep. I haven't done anything. I only moved in." "Sometimes that's enough. That cottage sits on the old boundary." "What boundary?" The woman's lip trembled. "The one between here and there, between the land of the living and the hollow roads beneath." Maggie sat, hands shaking. "I saw it, last night, at my window." The woman didn't respond immediately. Then she said, "Once it sees you, it doesn't forget." Another silence. Maggie stared at her tea, gone cold in her hands. "It doesn't hunt like a beast, it waits, watches. It makes you come to it." Back at Bryn Derw, the cottage felt darker, angrier. The very stone seemed to hum underfoot. That night, the mist turned black, pooling thick outside the door. Every creak of the house sounded like a whisper, a breath. She left every light on, every curtain drawn. And still, it came. Just past midnight, she heard the scrape. Not outside. Inside. The sound of claws on stone. Slow. Deliberate. She stood in the hallway, a fireplace poker in hand, every muscle trembling. The candlelight flickered wildly as the air shifted, thickened, like something had entered. She did not hear breathing, but she felt it. At the far end of the hall, the darkness grew teeth. Red eyes opened in the shadow, and then a shape stepped forward. Huge, its back brushing the low ceiling, fur black and damp, claws clicking softly on stone. It had no substance. Its body seemed to ripple in and out of existence like smoke with bones. But its eyes never wavered. It stood there, watching her. She did not speak. She could not move. And then it turned, walked silently toward the back door, vanished into the wall. Maggie collapsed, sobbing. The next morning, she found the back door ajar. The outside world was dead grey. Trees sagged like they'd aged 1,000 years in one night. She gathered her things, tried to pack, tried to leave, but the car would not start. She tried her phone, no signal, tried walking to the village. But every path led back to the cottage. She walked in circles for over an hour. The landmarks had changed. Trees moved. Stones she swore she passed before were gone. The cottage seemed to shift places behind her. By late afternoon, she was back at the gate, exhausted, defeated. The mist grew darker. That night, the wolf came again. She woke to the sound of growling from beneath the floorboards. And when she looked out the window, there it was again, at the edge of the trees, standing, watching, always watching. The third night brought no sleep, only darkness. By now, the cottage no longer felt like a home. It felt like a waiting room, a place in between. The mist never left, not even in daylight. It clung to the walls, pooled under the eaves, curled beneath the doorframes like breath from something immense exhaling just beyond sight. Maggie stopped using the fireplace. The flames cast too many shadows that moved when she did not. Instead, she sat in the corner of the bedroom, knees drawn to her chest, the iron poker clutched across her lap. She no longer tried to sleep, only waited for the scrape of claws, for the low growl from behind the walls, for the flicker of red eyes in the windows. Time was unmoored now, day and night blurred into grey. The clocks in the house had all stopped, their hands frozen at 3:33. Even her watch had ceased ticking. The battery was new. She'd checked it twice. The forest was no longer silent. It whispered now, a constant, rustling hush, as though hundreds of voices were speaking from beneath the leaves. When she stepped outside, the trees leaned in. The path that once led to the village had vanished entirely, swallowed by fog, replaced with brambles that bled sap like old wounds. On the 5th day, she found hoofprints in the garden. Not deer, too large, and not shaped quite right. They spiraled in tight circles. The ground churned into muddy spirals like something had danced there, or summoned. That night, she dreamed of fire in the woods, a ring of torches, hooded figures whispering in a language she could not understand, and above them all, the wolf, towering, watching, not with hunger, but recognition. She woke to the smell of smoke, ash on her tongue. The fireplace was cold, no embers, no flames. Still, her nightshirt smelled of burning. The following day, she tried to dig under the collapsed garden wall. She didn't know why, just a pull, a pressure in her skull, behind her eyes, like something calling her through the stone. Her fingers bled before she stopped. What she unearthed was not stone. It was bone. Long, curved, yellow with age, animal perhaps. But somehow she knew it had once been human. She buried it again and did not sleep that night. She no longer wrote in her notebook. The pages had begun to shift when she wasn't looking. Words she hadn't written appeared in her script, warnings, descriptions of things she hadn't seen. Yet, he comes through the hollow road. Red eyes in the branches. He knows your name. The old tongue calls you home. The next night she awoke to the sound of her own voice, speaking in the dark, low, chanting. She clamped her hand over her mouth, but the voice didn't stop. It was not coming from her throat. It was coming from beneath the bed. When she finally saw the wolf in full, it was standing in her kitchen. The storm had pressed close around the cottage all night, wind clawing at the shutters, rain slashing the windows so hard it sounded like the glass might shatter. The walls trembled under each gust, as if the house itself wanted to flee. She hadn't dared to sleep. The fire had long since burned down to ash, leaving only a faint warmth that felt as fragile as her courage. The kettle on the stove hissed, the sound sharp in the silence that followed a crack of distant thunder. Her hands trembled as she reached for it, fingers numb, not from cold, but from the rising, suffocating sense that she was no longer alone. The air had grown wrong, too thick, too heavy, pressing down on her shoulders, filling her lungs like smoke. She turned to pour the water, and the room changed. The air bent, warped, as if under some great invisible weight. The corners of the room seemed to stretch, the shadows lengthening, crawling toward her like fingers. The single light bulb flickered wildly, casting grotesque shapes that danced along the walls, then sputtered out with a final dying hiss, plunging the room into a smothering dimness. And then she felt it. Not heard, not saw, felt. A presence that filled the space like floodwater, rising, inescapable, ancient. The hairs on her arms stood up, her skin prickling with cold that seemed to seep from the floorboards, from the very stones of the hearth. And there it was, massive. The wolf stood in the dark, its form somehow more real than the room around it, as though the house had become a dream and it was the only true thing left. Fur black as shadow, but not simply black. Alive with shifting, writhing darkness, as if the night itself clung to it. Paws like iron shovels, each step silent, but leaving splinters where claws gouged deep into the wood. Its teeth were not white, but grey, stone-like, cracked, ancient, as if they had ground down bones that had long since turned to dust. It ducked beneath the low beam, its back arched, but its neck craned high, head cocked to one side in a gesture almost curious, almost human. And its eyes, God, its eyes. No longer simply red, but burning from within, lit like coals buried deep in a dying fire. They seemed to see through her, beyond her, as if stripping her soul bare. When its mouth opened, she saw the forked tongue, black as pitch, and smelled the breath of earth and rot and rain. And it spoke, not aloud, but straight into the marrow of her bones.
You belong to the Hollow now.
Her knees buckled. The cup slipped from her fingers and shattered on the floor, but she couldn't look away, couldn't move. The storm outside raged on, but it sounded distant now, muffled, as though she'd already stepped beyond the world she knew. And the wolf took a step closer. Maggie ran, out the door, into the woods, barefoot, into the thick fog. But the forest had changed. The trees were wrong, closer together, limbs twisted like broken arms, bark blistered with symbols she didn't recognize but felt deep in her marrow. The path wound impossibly, curving back on itself, like the land didn't want her to leave. She fell. The mud swallowed her knees, sucked at her hands. She crawled, sobbing, until she reached a clearing she didn't remember. A wide bowl of grassless earth, filled with standing stones, each stone carved with a different name. And at the centre, a hole, perfectly round, blacker than the air around it. She heard howling, not from the wolf, but many, hundreds, a choir of mourning and rage. She screamed and covered her ears, but the sound wasn't heard. It was felt, deep in her skull. A chorus of damned hounds rising through the mouth of the earth. The hole called to her. She woke hours later in the doorway of the cottage, mud caked to her skin. Her nails broken. Her lips cracked and blackened with dried blood. She had no memory of returning, The door was open. The candles inside were lit. She had not lit them. The wolf was waiting in the hallway, silent, still. But now, she was not afraid. She stepped inside. It stepped aside. Let her pass. The boundary was gone. She felt it break like a fever, like glass beneath her skin. The cottage no longer smelled of old stone and wood smoke. It reeked of earth, blood, ash. The mirrors no longer showed her reflection, only the wolf's, standing behind her, always behind her. She did not sleep, did not eat. She wrote again, but the words weren't hers. The hound does not kill. It remembers. It binds. The earth is hollow, and I have become its mouth. Maggie no longer marked time. The cottage stood in perpetual twilight. Whether it was dawn or dusk, she couldn't tell. The fog pressed in constantly now, thicker than wool. It had become part of the cottage, filling corners, pooling in doorways, clinging to her clothes like cobwebs. She had stopped fighting it. The books she once prized were stacked like barricades, untouched and moulding. Pages curled from the damp. Her laptop sat lifeless on the desk, screen black and dusted with ash. She no longer tried to leave. Every path turned to bramble. Every road doubled back on itself. The forest did not let her go, and neither did the wolf. It came each night now, without fail, never speaking, never growling, just watching, standing in doorways, sitting in the corner, silent, waiting. Maggie began to dream in its eyes. She started seeing things in the walls, faces, fleeting, blurred as though under running water. At first, she thought she was hallucinating, lack of food, lack of sleep. But then they began to whisper, not in English, not even in Welsh. The language was older, rooted in the land, like deep roots pressing through stone. She didn't understand the words, but she understood the feeling behind them. Grief, loss, a hunger that had waited centuries. One day, in a half-trance, she carved symbols into the cottage floor. Her hands moved without her permission, dragging a kitchen knife across the soft pine boards until blood welled beneath her nails. When she blinked, the sigil glowed faintly, a pulsing orange like embers in a hearth, and in the corner the wolf nodded. She began to remember things that weren't hers, visions, flashes, a girl, barefoot, walking into the forest beneath a red moon, hooded figures ringing a black pit, each holding a stone bowl filled with flame, a beast bound in silver chains, howling against its prison of carved rock. The girl knelt before it, offered her throat, and the beast whispered,
"You are mine now."
Maggie would wake with blood on her neck and no wound. The cottage no longer resembled anything she had once owned. Moss crept up the interior walls. Soil covered the floorboards in places. Beetles scuttled along the skirting boards, vanishing into cracks that hadn't been there before. The forest had come inside, and it was changing her. In the mirror, when she dared look, her eyes weren't always her own. Sometimes they flashed red. Other times the mirror didn't show her at all. Only the wolf, standing in her skin. She heard whispers from the garden at night, whispers calling her name. Not Maggie, but a different name, something guttural, ancient. Merga. She traced the word in the condensation on the window. The glass cracked beneath her finger. Then came the night she heard the door. It was not one she recognized. It didn't belong to the cottage. But she heard it nonetheless, deep in the stone, beneath the floor. A massive door, groaning open on hinges of bone. The wolf lifted its head and howled once, long and low, like a bell tolling for the dead. And Maggie answered. She walked to the cellar door, the one she had never opened, locked from the inside with rusted iron bolts. That night, the bolts were gone. The door creaked open at her touch, and down she went. The air grew cold as she descended. There were no steps, only a slope of packed earth. Roots hung from above, twitching gently like the legs of sleeping spiders. The tunnel curved and narrowed, darkness pressing close like a second skin. She walked for what felt like hours. Time was irrelevant here. Eventually, she reached a cavernous space, vast and domed, lit by no fire, yet faintly glowing from the lichen-covered walls. The air was wet, filled with the scent of iron and rot, and in the centre, the hole, not like before, now it was alive. It pulsed like a wound, a heartbeat from the depths, and beside it stood the wolf, no longer spectral, fully real, fur like shadow, muscles rippling under its massive frame. Its breath steamed in the air. Red eyes burned with understanding. Not of her, but of everything she'd ever been. It bowed its head, inviting her forward. And without hesitation, Maggie stepped to the edge. She peered into the abyss, and in the swirling dark, she saw faces. A girl burned as a witch in 1664. A mother drowned in a flooded valley in 1799. A woman in a Victorian nightgown walking into the fog and never returning. Each life ended the same. Each life fed the hound. She was not the first. She would not be the last. She was the vessel, the anchor, the mouth of the hollow road. The wolf did not serve her, and she did not serve it. They were one. She stepped into the dark and vanished. The cottage was sold quietly without fanfare. A couple from Manchester. They found it quaint, if a bit damp. No one warned them. No one said a word. The locals avoided eye contact when they asked about the history. They moved in on a bright spring day. On the first night, the dog barked endlessly at the woods. On the second night, the lights flickered and went out. On the third night, they woke to footprints in the hallway. Huge, clawed, wet with mud. And on the fourth night, just before dawn, they looked out the window toward the edge of the trees and saw her. A woman in a white nightgown, standing perfectly still. Her eyes gleamed faintly in the dark. And beside her, a wolf, larger than any animal should be, its eyes red as embers, watching, waiting. Spring came late that year. The snow clung stubbornly to the hills around Lindwerdu, refusing to melt even as daffodils pushed through the dead grass. Locals muttered that the land was turned wrong, though no one dared elaborate. Farmers avoided their fields after sunset. Dogs were kept indoors. The woods around the hollow grew dense and choked, branches knotting like clenched fingers. No birds nested there. No wind stirred within it. The cottage on the hill remained still. The new owners, Sarah and Ben Loxley, were polite enough. Teachers, they said, needed quiet, escape from city air. They renovated the roof, sanded the floors, painted the walls white. Anything to brighten it. But the brightness didn't last. Sarah started sleepwalking. Ben found her standing at the base of the garden, staring into the trees. Her lips moved in silence. Her eyes were glassy. When he tried to guide her back, she scratched him across the cheek. She didn't remember in the morning. The dog refused to enter the west bedroom. It barked at the fireplace, cowered under the table during storms, even when the sky was clear. They found strange marks under the floorboards during a wiring job. A perfect circle carved in charcoal, ringed with spirals and symbols neither could read. They photographed it, posted online. No one knew the language, but someone replied, "Seal it, immediately. That house stands on the Hollow Road." They didn't understand. One night, under a swollen red moon, Sarah dreamed of a woman in a white nightdress. She was standing just beyond the trees, pale, wet with mist, and beside her, towering over her shoulder, was the wolf, so large it nearly blotted out the trees. Its eyes were open flames. Its breath steamed into the air in slow, heavy clouds. It looked at Sarah, and then it smiled. She woke, screaming. Ben calmed her, dismissing it as stress, a trick of the mind. But the next morning, claw marks raked the inside of the kitchen door. Deep. Too high for a dog. Too wide for a man. They spoke to the locals again. But this time, a few old voices opened. "It's the Hound of the Hollow," one said. "It keeps the gate between worlds," another whispered. "It takes a voice, every few generations." "She's the new voice, isn't she?" an old man asked. "Poor girl. You seen her yet?" Sarah said yes. Ben said no. The final night came with no warning. Sarah woke again, not in bed, but standing in the woods, barefoot, mud to her calves. The sky was black, moonless. Fog wrapped the trees like gauze. In front of her, a figure stood, facing away. Long, dark hair, thin shoulders. The woman turned, and it was her, but not quite. The same face, but hollow, sunken, eyes red-rimmed and unblinking, lips cracked and pale. Behind her, the wolf waited, its eyes locked onto Sarah, and it spoke. Not with words, but a sound like breath caught in flame.
The land remembers. You walk the Hollow Road now.
Sarah screamed, ran. Branches tore at her skin, roots caught her ankles. The forest pulsed around her, heartbeat beneath her feet. She burst into the clearing behind the cottage, sobbing, lungs burning, and saw the cottage windows aglow with firelight, but they hadn't lit any. In the upstairs window stood a shape, a woman, white nightdress, red eyes gleaming through the glass. Ben found her the next morning, curled in the bathtub, soaking wet, covered in moss. She had no memory of returning. The floor beneath the tub was soft, damp like rotting earth. It never dried again. They moved out within the week. The house was listed again, without explanation. Cheap. Locals don't ask who buys it anymore. They just watch and wait. Every red moon, the hound howls from the trees. And sometimes, just before dawn, a woman's voice answers.
The land remembers.
Thank you for listening to Series 1 of Whispers in the Dark. If you'd like to support the show, head over to our Patreon where you can sign up to one of 3 different tiers. Or if you'd prefer to make a one-off contribution, maybe you'd like to buy me a coffee or show support through our website at Buzzsprout. Don't forget to follow us on Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, and YouTube to stay up to date with new episodes, behind-the-scenes content, and more chilling tales. Music written and composed by Roman Dudchik. I'll be back soon with Series 2, bringing you even darker, more terrifying tales. And remember, you've heard the whispers. But some doors, once opened, never truly close. If you feel something watching tonight, don't look back. We'll see you soon. If the dark lets you go,